He's presented not one, not two, but 9 union budgets. And so who will know better as to what happens in North Block at this stage? On the agenda for FM, a very special guest today, former Finance Minister P Chidambaram. Thanks very much for being with us. You've had the privilege to produce 8 full and 1 interim budget, second only to Morarji Desai, if I'm right. And of course, one of them was always called the dream budget. You or anybody else has never had the luxury in post-liberalized India that Arun Jaitley has, a 282 in Lok Sabha. What is his elbow room given that?
Well, if the government knows how to use the 282 and build bridges with opposition, I think a lot of things which could not be done by a minority government or a government which did not have an absolute majority in the Lok Sabha can be done. Please remember that a finance bill has to pass only in the Lok Sabha.
That's right.
It doesn't matter what the Rajya Sabha does with it. Therefore, this is a great opportunity to push through financial sector reform and the bills and the ideas which were conceived perhaps by previous governments, but they did not have the opportunity to push them through.
Which ones would you want to be pushed on a priority basis, given the 282 in Lok Sabha?
The insurance bill is before the House. I think they should push for the GST. They should also bring back the original version of the direct taxes code. And then they should begin work on the legislative agenda of the FSLRC report.
Before we plunge headlong into the budget, I have one more question to ask you on the political capital of 282. Are you surprised that this is not put to any good use? Because the opposition is all in the Rajya Sabha and that is where the obstruction is. And I would ask you to wear the hat of a very reformist finance minister that you have been. That is a lot of opposition merely political rhetoric today.
See, opposition's business is to oppose. You can't reject it as political rhetoric. What was the BJP doing when it was in opposition? So it is the responsibility of the government to use its majority. But I think they have shot themselves in the foot. In fact, they are shooting themselves every day in the foot by allowing voices of distraction to cloud the agenda, to divert the agenda. I think the focus on reform, on development, which they promised, is not there. Because that focus is not there, this 282 seems a wasted majority.
Let's begin by talking about Mr. Jaitley's first full year budget. That's exactly why we are talking today. There are truckloads of expectations against his budget. So the common man wants jobs, he wants changes. Corporate India wants reforms. Markets are absolutely pregnant with expectations. They want to rally further. And then, of course, they're very hawk-eyed ratings agencies. Because you've been there and you've done that 9 times, who should the budget really talk to?
The budget should focus on the essentials. The core principles of a budget making are stability in the economy, attracting investment, keeping inflation as low as possible, and stimulating growth. These are the core principles of every budget. If you stick to the knitting, if you stick to your core principles, growth will follow. When growth follows, jobs will be created. It's only when you forget the core principles and begin to appease this section or that section, you run into problems.
I'll ask you a little later who should you be appeasing in the budget exercise, but the heart of most arguments as far as this budget is concerned is the whole debate between fiscal deficit versus growth. And because you said growth in some sense is non-negotiable and it will follow if you do the right things, let me ask you this question. Would you expect or would you want Finance Minister Jaitley to stick to the roadmap that you've laid out as far as fiscal consolidation is concerned, or do you believe he needs to spur public investment because private investment hasn't kick-started, it hasn't taken off? And this has to be done if it's done in the quest of boosting growth.
The first part of your question, answer is absolutely. He should stick to the fiscal consolidation map drawn up by Vijay Kelkar and which our government had accepted.
Right.
And he had accepted it in his budget speech last year. If he swerves from that path, I'm afraid he flunks the exam. After that, it doesn't matter whether he writes the second paper well or the third paper well.
Right.
He's flunked the exam. But if he sticks to the fiscal consolidation path, then we can look at There are other things that he has done. I think he has enough fiscal space to do what he wants to do. Of course, within limits. No government in India has the luxury of doing all that it wants to do in the first year. But I would urge him strongly to stick to the fiscal consolidation path, if I may add, notwithstanding his chief economic advisor or the vice chairman of the Niti Aayog.
Wanting him to slip and expand that deficit. But I will urge you to answer one more question on this, because a lot of economists, including the two gentlemen that you named, do believe that if fiscal slippage is allowed in the quest of growth, it is perhaps going to be pardonable. Do you believe ratings agencies will buy that, or will they actually take them to the cleaners?
I'm telling you, if he slips on the fiscal deficit target, he will flunk the exam. And the rating agencies will be merciless.
Let's just move on to Governor Rajan and what has he said. He's somebody who has been maintaining for a while that our war is against inflation. But if you see the new numbers and the whole revised data, the battle against inflation seems to have won a long time back. Inflation
I don't agree. I don't agree.
Why do you disagree?
I don't agree. The battle against rapid inflation or aggressive inflation has been won. But I think if you spend your money unwisely, so for example, if you promote consumption expenditure rather than investment expenditure, there is a danger that inflation will raise its head again. If you slip on the fiscal deficit, there is a danger that inflation will rise again. And oil still remains an imponderable. It's not under your control. So you always should keep some headroom to provide for oil prices to rise.
I will come to oil in just a bit, because I'm sure that's a position that you envy this government from where you were. Just to talk on Governor Rajan, he has said that the next landmark or the next instance which will turn his monetary cycle will be the quality of fiscal consolidation. You have said it publicly that North Bloc alone cannot walk on the growth path. Is he then justified to maintain that stance?
No. As central bank governor, he is justified in the stance that he is taking. North Bloc must continue to nudge him to provide enough space to stimulate growth. So I think there are options. There are options apart from cutting the policy rate. There are other options available to a governor. There are other monetary instruments available to a governor. The governor must support growth, while at the same time cautioning government not to slip up on matters which can aggravate inflation.
You had said just a short while back that oil is imponderable. We do not know what is going to happen next with oil. From where you see things now, is it a little envious a position that Finance Minister Jaitley is? Nobody realized that crude is actually going to slip $50 a barrel from just a year back. So that's question number one. And question number two is, do you believe the government can rationalize subsidies substantially? You can't give me an economist answer yes, because you've been there and you know it's politically very difficult to.
You see, this government has been very lucky on oil. My calculations show that they may have saved $50 billion outgo only on oil. And this is not counting the second round effect on fertilizers and on some other subsidies. But how have they used this $50 billion saving that they have made? That we will see only when the numbers are presented. If they have used this $50 billion to consolidate the fiscal situation, we should congratulate them for that, but we have to wait for the numbers. As far as subsidies are concerned, I agree that you cannot pass the entire reduction in oil prices to the consumer, because that has got other consequences. For example, consumption of fuel will go up. People will become less responsible in consuming fuel. And as I said, we must always keep some headroom for a possible rise in oil prices.
That's right.
Say, a short rise in oil prices, a spurt in oil prices, government should be able to absorb without raising retail prices.
True.
So I think they have done a balancing act. They've passed some benefits to the consumer, but not all, which I think on balance appears to be the correct approach.
So from the former finance minister, you believe the frequent excise rate hikes that have happened as far as fuel is concerned is a good, prudent move?
Well, I didn't say good. I said it's prudent because we don't know when oil prices will go up again. But if oil prices stabilize or go down further, then I think they should cut again. But not cut too much that it will promote irresponsible consumption of diesel and petrol.
Let me move to the other theme, and that seems to be the pet project of this government, which is Make in India. It's a very smart slogan. People believe it's a publicity blaze of sorts. Your own government had something called the National Manufacturing Policy, but precious little has been done on manufacturing just yet. The question that I'm asking you is that are fiscal incentives crucial for something like manufacturing to take off? What would you want this budget to state? SOPs, enablers, fiscal incentives for Make in India to be a real reality?
Let me go back to the phrase you used, precious little has been done. Why? I think they act first and think later. Before you announced a slogan like Make in India from the Red Fort, you should have thought through the whole thing. For example, we had 24 crore accounts called zero balance accounts or no frills account. They called it Jan Dhan and added 12 crore.
That's right.
But what's the purpose? Our 24 crore as well as the NDA's 12 crore, taken together 36 crore, 75% of those accounts have no operation at all, no activity
That's
at all.
right.
So you have to think through before you actually roll out a program. Now, what does Make in India mean? Make in India means that, well, it can mean many things.
Right.
Firstly, it can mean import substitution, which is not a...
That's not the wise thing to do.
It's not a wise thing to do for a developing economy. Make in India can also mean that we accelerate or enlarge the manufacturing sector, which is a good thing to do. But to enlarge the manufacturing sector, you need land, you need power, you need technology, and above all, you need capital. So they should have addressed the constraints to these factors
Right.
before they started publicizing the slogan Make in India. What have they done to address the issue of land? They've got a muddle-headed land ordinance, which has run into
Stuck in absolute crossfires.
serious trouble.
Yes.
They have done nothing on power, nothing on power. We'll have to wait for the numbers to see whether the power sector has actually grown.
But one expects the coal auction, which has happened, will perhaps put that virtuous cycle of power
No,
back
it will,
in motion.
it will mean that more power will be produced, but at a higher cost.
That's right.
At a higher cost. They should have addressed technology. I find that they have done nothing in the last 9 months to attract cutting-edge technology. I have not seen any agreement being signed. And above all, investments. I think they have not really addressed the need to go out and meet investors. See, investment is an act of faith. I've dealt with hundreds of multinationals.
That's right.
No multinational board, no CEO of a multinational wakes up in the morning and says, oh
I'm
my
going to
God,
invest
I
in
have
India."
to invest in India. He doesn't say that. He probably spends 10 minutes a quarter thinking about investing in India. So you have to woo the multinational, woo the company to invest in India.
But one would actually believe that this government is doing a lot of that. They're actually going out of their way to woo India in, to woo the global investor. Let me ask you a counter question. Why is it that the wooing is not converting into action?
I think they're wooing NRIs, not investors.
And that's the difference.
They're addressing rallies in Madison Avenue and some Sydney cricket ground. What you should be addressing is the Japanese organization called Kedarna.
But will you...
They should address the chambers of commerce. They should address the sector association.
What would you expect the budget to do? Do you fear it will be a lot of fiscal incentives that will be given, a MAT may be lowered for a Make in India?
See, I have written about it. I think the budget should focus on fiscal consolidation,
Right.
attracting investments. Budget should address equity issues. Equity issues are as important as fiscal issues. While I will spend time looking at the numbers to look at the fiscal issues that have been addressed, I will also spend time on the expenditure budget to see how the equity issues have been addressed.
That's right, yes.
And above all, they have to address the issue of rising inequality. I'm afraid all the messages, all the signals that are coming out of North Block and South Block are, listen, we have to please the corporates.
You have written, and the same writing that you're referring to, let me refer to it also, you have said that everybody above a certain threshold should be made to pay taxes. You have been there and you've done that for 9 times in a row. Is that as easy as you're making it out to be?
It is. I think you shouldn't be overwhelmed by the voices of the 3 crore people who are paying taxes. Let me assume all 3 crore are honest taxpayers. Let me assume so.
That's right.
Even then, the taxes they pay are very small compared to taxes paid by their counterparts in other countries.
That's right.
The maximum tax rate is 30%.
True.
How many pay 30%? How many admit to an income of more than 1 crore rupee a year? Some 42,000 or so.
30% I could have put up my hand on, not the crore.
Therefore, not very many. Yes, there are people who are in the 10% bracket who feel a bit squeezed.
That's right.
But there are many other allowances that they enjoy, many other deductions they enjoy. I don't think the answer is to increase the deductions. If you want to really encourage the tax-paying class, give incentives for financial savings. But I think you should keep in mind the 105 crore people who don't pay taxes and the 30 or 40 crore who are extremely poor and whose concerns are not about taxes and tax rates. Their concerns are equity and rising inequality.
Do you believe Mr. Jaitley squandered the opportunity to bury the ghost of retrospective tax in his last budget in July, and he should do that finally now? And also on GAR, you've written about it, you've spoken about this. The question that I want to ask you is that do you believe he is going to move on GAR, or will that be deferred any further? If you say he should move on GAR, is the tax department ready for it? So 2 questions there.
Answer is yes, he should move forward on GAR, but the information that I'm getting is the tax department is not ready for it. I think they have not invested enough in training the officers on GAR, and an untrained officer, if GAR is placed in the hands of an untrained officer, it could lead to very bad consequences. So if you defer GAR, I can understand that, but if you bury GAR, I will criticize the government.
Do you fear it could be buried?
Well, the signals that are coming out is, I think they're preparing for a burial of GAR.
Soft burial,
yeah.
Quiet burial. And
well,
what about the retrospective tax?
On retrospective tax, you see, if the law had been amended immediately after the judgment of the Bombay High Court, nobody would have raised the flag. The law was amended after the Supreme Court judgment,
That's right.
which is what created this controversy.
True.
But on merits, forget the retrospectivity, forget the timing. On merits, it is beyond argument that capital gains made out of sale of a business wholly situated in India must be subject to tax.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that principle is lost in the din about retrospective tax. So one suggestion that we toyed with when we were in government was, we'll collect the tax, but we will waive the interest and penalty.
Right.
We couldn't go through with that because we didn't have a majority. And we were not sure whether the BJP will support it.
That's right.
And we were worried that people will point another finger and say, this is another scam.
That's right.
But Mr. Jaitley has a majority. I think if he puts forward a convincing case why he would like to collect the tax, but waive the interest and penalty, and goes forward with a change of law, I think by and large the present Lok Sabha should support that.
You've been a votary of prudent divestment in the past, but even under your guidance and under your regime, even under your government, the targets could never be met. The world went through a turmoil, equity markets weren't so good, but look at this government. A 43,000, 45,000 crore target, equity markets absolutely on a bull run, and yet the target has not been achieved. What would you want Budget 2015 to do? Set a new target, achieve it, or set a lower target?
See, a disinvestment target is not cast in stone. A disinvestment target is set to make sure that you reach your fiscal targets. But if you are reaching your fiscal targets otherwise, why disinvest in a hurry? I don't think this government or even my government was ready for privatization. So disinvestment is not a prelude to privatization. It's only talking about disinvestment. The company will remain in the public sector.
Right.
But if you're reaching your fiscal targets otherwise, I don't see any reason why you should disinvest in a hurry. You can postpone it to the next year and disinvest in the next year.
So depending upon your resources, how
Depending upon, it's only a resource raising mechanism. As long as your policy is not privatization.
You mentioned corporate India a little while back, and I said I'm going to come back to the growing sense of impatience. Corporate India has been the biggest votary of this government, and yet there are quarters that are talking about impatience, that are talking about not enough has been done. From where you see things, will you sympathize with Mr. Jaitley because you were also criticized despite having done so much, or do you believe that impatience at one level is justified?
Well, I don't think we should worry too much about the praise, the criticism by corporate India, or be flattered by the praise they shower. For every voice of criticism, they have found another voice which says they're doing a great job. I think neither of them is true. I don't think Mr. Jaitley should worry too much about the voices from corporate India. He should simply go ahead and deliver on what they promised to do before elections and after they assumed office. I'm afraid they have delivered very little. Please remember, not one bill of consequence has been passed.
They say there's a lot of political opposition to it.
No, there will always be opposition. This is not a monarchy where there will be no opposition. This is a democracy, there will be an opposition. There have not one bill of consequence has been passed in the last 10 months. Not one major development program has been rolled out in the last 10 months.
I have a question to ask of you because you've been there and you understand how things work. There's a lot of chatter and talk in the corridors of power about the PMO's involvement in this budget. The Prime Minister has been very hands-on. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I don't know. You can confirm it if you know. I believe the PMO has been involved for several hours a day over the last 3 weeks. That I think is bad.
Why do you say it's bad?
That I think is wrong. A finance minister must be allowed to make a budget. The Prime Minister must be able to stand back, look at the budget from an overall political, social point of view and say, good, not good enough, try to tweak here and tweak there. If the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office starts making the budget, who will stand back and look at the budget before it's presented? Every budget before it is presented, somebody must be able to take a step back, look at it, and then comment on its quality.
So you've made 9 budgets, and I have a last question to ask of you. Do finance ministers have a good night's sleep a day before they're presenting this union budget that the world seems to be watching and have huge interests in?
I have had a good night's sleep because I start writing my budget speeches 2 weeks before the budget day. And I write and rewrite and edit and re-edit, and by the time the last version is available, I know it virtually by heart. Therefore, I sleep very well. But if your budget speech is being put together in the last day, then of course you will have a sleepless night, how it's going to emerge on the day of the budget. So I think if you write your budget speech well in advance, and the finance minister's written it himself, as I believe he will, then I think you can sleep well.
Fair point indeed. I have one quick rapid fire to do with you, and I will ask you to give me very short, brief answers. Yes or no is preferable. Will Mr. Jaitley stick to the 3.6% fiscal deficit target?
Yes.
Will India grow at 8% for next year?
No.
What is the one thing that Mr. Jaitley needs to do to kickstart investment?
Restore credibility of the government, which has been dented because of distracting voices.
Who should this budget please?
The budget should please everyone. It shouldn't displease anyone. It should please everyone. But in the everyone, the number that should be in focus is the 40 or 45 crore people who are still very poor.
Who has been India's best finance minister?
I have no hesitation in saying not I.
On that note, thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Chidambaram. You've laid out the agenda. We'll now have to see how much Mr. Jaitley meets that.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.